I know now when we stopped being us, when I broke something precious in you. It wasn't a sudden break, no sharp crack or something precious shattering. No, it was in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, during what should have been just another embrace. I felt your arm go silent. The realization stole my breath. There was a wall now, solid and real, where once there had only been open arms. Your body still went through the motions, arms encircling, hands placed carefully on my back. But the story was gone. The eloquence of your touch had been replaced by silence, each gesture measured and muted. Then came the worst revelation, the one that made my stomach drop. This wall hadn't been built in a day. Each brick had been carefully placed, one by one, while I was too lost in my own need to notice the growing distance. Like watching a time-lapse of a garden withering. I could suddenly see every moment I missed. Every time you withdrawn slightly, every embrace that had grown a little shorter, every touch that become a little more careful. How did I miss it? I, who became so fluent in the language of your touch, who could read volumes in the smallest gesture. How did I not feel the mortar being mixed, the foundation being laid? Was I so consumed by my own hunger for comfort that I couldn't see you building your defense, brick by careful brick? Before you, touch was my enemy. The slightest brush of contact would send me recoiling, skin electric with fear, body coiled tight like a spring ready to flee. I lived in a fortress built of careful distance, measuring the exact space between myself and others to keep breathing. You met someone who would rather break than be held. But you, gods, you were so patient. You saw past my walls, past my flinches, past years of carefully constructed defenses. You telegraph every moment, waiting for my slight nod before bridging the gap between us. Just 5 seconds, you'd say. We'll try for just 5 seconds. As if you understood that even that felt like an eternity to someone who had spent a lifetime learning to disappear in a single touch. I didn't realize then what it cost you, how much strength it takes to be someone's safe harbor, to hold steady while they learn to trust the very thing they fear. You made it seem effortless, the way you'd reach for my hand, wade through my initial stiffening, your fingers gentle against mine until the trembling would quiet. You taught me that sometimes love doesn't need to be spoken or analyzed. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. Then came the night everything changed. Grief. It wrapped around my throat like a vice, and I couldn't breathe through the screaming in my head. My body remembered its old language then, the dialect of flight, of hiding, of corners and shadows and careful distance. The carpet in the closet was surprisingly soft against my knees. I curled into the darkest corner, trying to read safety in the shadows. In the cold, I was so familiar with. But then came the soft whisper of your footsteps, the quiet creak of the door. You didn't flood the space with words of light. Instead, you folded yourself down beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of your presence, far enough that I wasn't drowning in it. Let me help carry this, you whispered. Just that. No demands, no questions, no empty promises. Just an offering, spelled out in the slight tremor of your voice. I should have seen it then. After that, I became insatiable for your comfort. Every anxiety attack, every sleepless night, Every moment the weight of existing became too much. I learned to lean into you, to let you hold me until I remembered how to stand. I read novels in your touch, became fluent in the language of your comfort. Each embrace a lifetime I clung to with desperate hands. My body recognized it before my mind could name it. The wall, like pressing against the window where there had once been an open door. The shock of it stole my breath mid-inhale. We were in the kitchen, such an ordinary place for everything to change. You'd hug me countless times in this exact spot, between the counter and the sink, the afternoon light making familiar patterns on the floor. But this time, your arms were there, going through the motions of embrace, but the barely perceptible tremor of connection, that living current that had always hummed between us, that was missing. Your chest, usually soft and yielding against mine, had become marble smooth and distant. Your hands, once so eloquent in their support, lay flat and silent against my back, like closed books, not comforting, just present, not holding, just containing. I felt every muscle in my body register the change. My lungs forgot their next note. My heart stumbled over its rhythm. Even my skin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a warmth that no longer came. Then came the cascade of realizations. This wasn't sudden, this wasn't new. This wall had been rising brick by brick, built from every time I reached for you in blind need. Every late night comfort, every panic attack, every moment I'd use your strength to shore up my weakness, they had all become mortar in this barrier I was only now feeling. As I stepped back, I felt my own defenses beginning to rise again. Not the old walls built from fear of touch. Those had crumbled long ago. No. These new barriers were crafted from a different kind of understanding. I had become something you needed protection from. My need of comfort had transformed your natural language of care into something heavy, something that required guardedness. You were preparing for the day when my waves of need would become too much to hold. I found myself pulling back, measuring the space between us again. But this time, to protect you from my hunger of comfort, rather than to protect myself from touch. I broke something in you, didn't I? In learning to need, to touch so desperately, in finally allowing myself to trust it so completely, I wore out your ability to speak it freely. Each time I sought shelter in your strength, each moment I begged your body to tell me I was safe. I was unknowingly teaching you that touch could be exhausting, that love expressed through physical comfort could become a burden too heavy to bear. Your body still goes through the motions, but the poetry had abandoned us. Where once there were sonnets of support flowing from your fingertips, now there are only brief, measured notes. The vast language of comfort I learned to read in your embrace had been reduced to whispered fragments. I am here, and this is what I can give. And most painfully, this is where I must stop. The bitter irony of it isn't lost on me. How I was once the one afraid of touch, now I'm the one who made you afraid to give it freely. I turned your natural language into something heavy, something that cost too much to speak. In learning to trust your touch, I taught you to doubt it. And now here I am, building my own walls again, trying to protect you from very need you taught me it was safe to feel. They never tell you about this particular species of guilt. The weight of watching someone translate their native language into careful, measured phrases because you demand too many words too quickly. I carry the ghosts of your unedited touch like a book of poems I can no longer read. The memory of your uninhibited embrace. The easy way comfort once poured from your hands. The knowledge that I took too much from a well I thought endless. Sometimes in the quiet hours I wonder if it would have been kinder to remain untranslated, to have stayed in my original language of fear rather than learning the warmth of your comfort, only to watch it cool into careful calculations. I gather the scattered pieces of my guilt each day, adding them to my new walls like mortar. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to remain untouched, if never learning the warmth of your comfort would have been kinder than teaching you to ration it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for breaking this beautiful language you spoke so fluently, for being so immersed in my own translation that I couldn't see your words growing heavier, your sentence more carefully constructed. I was reading novels in your touch while you were running out of ink. But please know, even now, even understanding the cost, I wouldn't choose to unlearn a single moment of safety you taught me. Because gods, how freely your love used to flow through your fingertips before I taught you to guard it so carefully. I hope you find someone who helps you remember the joy of speaking comfort freely. Someone who reads your language of touch like poetry rather than desperate necessity, who lets you write at your own pace rather than demanding entire books at once. Meanwhile, I'll be here, practicing this new grammar of self-reliance, not forgetting the warmth of your touch, but learning to generate my own heat. Maybe someday we'll meet again in this space between languages, not as translator and translated, not as savior and saved, but as two people who remember both the beauty and the cost of speaking love through touch. Until then, I carry your lesson like a phase book of survival. Sometimes touch breaks, sometimes it heals, and sometimes the bravest thing is learning when to hold your own hand.